We're now going to replace the ignition coil and ignition module on the Grand Marquis. Here's the Accel high performance coil. And what we're going to do is put on terminal lugs on the old wires here to hook up to the coil. Now I'm going to solder them on there to make sure I get the best connection. I don't like to just crimp stuff because crimp joints can oxidize. So get the soldering iron and I'll put on new terminal ends on here. It's got this Ford connector, this kind of flaky connector for the ignition coil. I'm going to upgrade to actual ring terminals for the new Accel coil. I got the coil bracket loosened so it can slip the new one in there. So first thing I'll do is get the soldering iron set up and we can put the terminals on. Here's the new Accel coil mounted on there. Put on the terminal lugs here. Soldered them on. Used some heat shrink tubing for extra insulation. I mounted it right in the coil bracket just like the original one was. The circuit of this is pretty similar to the points ignition types. The red lead going to the positive terminal of the coil is from the ignition switch through the ballast resistor, which is bypassed during startup. And then the negative lead goes over to the ignition module where it's switched by a transistor rather than the points to provide the collapsing magnetic field which generates the high voltage. So now the next thing to do is to replace the ignition module. And it looks like that this mounts with screws that are screwed up through the wheel well. So I'll disconnect the screws, see what kind of size I need, then we can mount on the new ignition module. Here are the bolts for the ignition module. They're 7/16 and they're up inside the fender, up inside the wheel well. I'm going to continue taking them off and we can mount the new module on. Now the new ignition module is mounted, so let's check the performance. I barely had to turn the key and it's running really smooth. Startup performance is now just as good as this one. This bus is one of the best starting vehicles I've seen. Now the Grand Marquis, it's so much better than it was before. Got one more thing I've got to fix on the Grand Marquis, and that relates to a repair I did earlier. The relay for the power windows that I added quit working. I think this particular type of relay may not have been able to withstand continuous duty, so I think I've got a heavier duty 12 volt relay I'll put on it here. And then I may not get to this today, but I am going to replace this tail light on here. Thanks to a YouTube viewer who sent me one, I definitely want to put that new tail light on. The tractor also needs repair on the starter or on the ignition switch though, so I may have to postpone the tail light repair till later, but now the car is back in action and the starting performance is much better than it's ever been. Here's the replacement relay I'm going to use. I actually borrowed this out of one of the air conditioning relays in the house, so I'll need to go back to the electronics distributor and get myself another one, but it was don't think I'll really need air conditioning in the house right at this point. It's one of the relays that turns one of the window units on and off. And I got this socket at Commercial Electronics to use in the jukebox to switch the 70 volt speaker system in the jukebox. But this is a more urgent need, so I'll just go back to the distributor and pick up another relay and socket for that purpose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to parallel the two contacts in here to get the maximum current capacity. And it will only draw current through the contacts intermittently just when the window contacts are activated. But I know that these relays can run continuous. They could run 24 hours a day if you wanted to and not burn up. I think maybe this relay here, this type, was designed for intermittent use, although it didn't say that on the package. But I think the coil burned out on it just from it being on continuously. So I was careful to make sure I left enough lead length on these cables, so if I had to replace it, I could. So I'm going to cut off the quick-on terminals and wire it up to the screw terminals of the relay socket. And this will be even easier to replace if it ever craps out again, because we'll just plug a new relay into the socket. So now let me cut off the old wire terminals and we'll get this wired up. It's the new relay installed. May be able to see it actuate when I turn the switch to accessory. Now the power windows are working again.